All right, we're live. So first of
Great.
all, I have to say thank you so much for joining this stream, because what time is it where you are?
About 1:30 in the morning.
Absolute hero. So happy to have you on. But yeah, we had to just announce that. So I'm tired from running an event today, but if you're tired, just whatever happens, thank you so much for being here. Well done. Well done is the main thing.
You're welcome. The good thing is it's Friday here, so it's the end of
True.
my week.
In the future. I love it. Okay, before we start, you mentioned when we did our prep call that you have a great background. I am one who loves a funky background. So what have you got on that bookcase? A quick summary of what's going on.
Oh, it's definitely my nerd shrine. So there's Legos. I'm a big science fiction fantasy fan. So got some Star Wars Lego. A lot of my favorite authors. Peter Hamilton, Brandon Sanderson books, leather-bound books. I love those. Yeah, and then Legos from places I've been and lived and have special memories from, actually. So this is Singapore, the Marina Bay Sands. I don't know if anyone recognises that. And then what's that one called? I've forgotten it's changed its name, but the one in Dubai, the really tall
the really
one.
tall. Yeah.
Burj Khalifa, but then it changed its name, so I've forgotten. But and then a bit of gaming scenery and board gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, everything. So yeah.
I love that for Lego where you've lived. I mean, I just live in London, so I've always lived in London, so it might be pretty boring, be just a bus or Big Ben. But that's really cool because this Gauntlets Lego, my parents got that for me for a birthday, and so I feel like, and I've got my Funko Pops to the side, but I do. There's many an Easter egg. When I swivel around in my chair, people can see a lot of what's on my anyway.
The guitar appears and everything. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, let's get into it. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, and I'm a Senior Optimization Architect at AWS. Thank you so much for joining. As always, any comments, questions you have, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we have today Aniko, just double checking how to pronounce the name, talking about S3 Lens. SAP Lens. I've talked about S3 Lens today. Do you know what? I had one job today, Steph, was not to muck up the title. If only this was a edit redo. SAP Lens.
Take two. Yep.
SAP Lens version 2. That's a good little segue, version 2. But yeah, so excited to learn about it, especially because, like a lot of times on this show, I didn't know anything about it. So we're going to chat about the new release that happened at reInvent last year, and about what the service is, and generally learn about how it can help customers. So before we start, do you want to give us your 1-minute origin story?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steph. So I began my life in technology a long time ago, actually in HR and payroll systems, and I built one of the first candidate recruitment management systems, took a company from paper to digitization, and that was my on-ramp into tech. And that was a sort of enterprise resource planning type system, and so I joined a consulting firm, which was Accenture, and I got into SAP, which is the world's largest ERP vendor, and I've basically been in SAP for almost 20 years now, and implemented SAP, upgraded it, innovated on top of it. Moved it to cloud, and more recently, obviously been working on modernizing it as much as possible in conjunction with AWS. A lot of that consulting work took me around the world and working with pretty big organizations, Singapore and Dubai and Queensland, Canberra in Australia, the federal government, and then more recently working at AWS for the last almost 4 years. I've been helping Australia and New Zealand customers migrate to AWS and modernize their SAP systems on AWS. And the great thing about working in SAP is you really do get to work with like all these brand names, right? So BHP is one of the biggest customers biggest companies in the world, but is a big customer. Macquarie Bank, Commonwealth Bank in Australia. These are household names. Our utilities, our banks, things like that. They all run SAP for their enterprise resource planning, and just fantastic seeing all these different businesses and how they run, and helping them get value out of SAP as they move to AWS.
Yeah, and it's such a tangible thing. I mean, I think of it, and I think of when I worked at KPMG or now, it's the thing where I think of it as an expenses tool. That's what we use it for. But I know what like people say that you see the buildings a lot, and it is a very like, this is a thing I'm helping them to move to the cloud. Whereas sometimes when we speak to companies that they have so many different applications, you don't really know what it is they're doing, and it can be a bit vague. This is very like on the nose. So talking about that, I mean, we're talking about SAP. What is SAP Lens?
Sure. SAP Lens is our specific lens for the AWS well-architected framework. I guess a quick overview of the well-architected framework. You've probably covered it before, but the 6 pillars: security, reliability, cost optimization, performance efficiency, operational excellence, and sustainability, I think. That's our generic framework. But many of our customers over the past 3-4 years, they've been saying, how do I apply this to SAP systems in AWS? And so in 2021, we got together with a group of authors, and we started collecting best practices and proven design principles from our customers, from our partners, internally in all of our technical field communities. And we started distilling all of that SAP-specific guidance and suggestions down into a lens for AWS well-architected. So it's broken down into the 6 pillars, and it's really, I say to our customers, it's the reference book for SAP on AWS. If you want to know where to start for security, open the security pillar and just start from the start and start reading. It links out to all our other documentation. It has suggestions and best practices, and it's really a good place to start on for any question with SAP on AWS.
And so, without sounding silly, the lens is kind of like, is it the way you look at the well-architected framework then? So it's like the quote-unquote lens is, you're looking at it from that application's point of view. Is that why it's called that, or that kind of vibe?
Yes, yeah, and it is its own white paper. It is its own, link that you can go to and read. But we certainly started with the AWS well-architected framework more generically, and we took those design principles, and then we said, can this apply to SAP? Because in some cases, some of those design principles can't, like containerization and such. Some of those things you cannot apply to SAP because of its architecture. It runs on EC2 instances. There's very little sort of RDS generally in an SAP architecture. So we took the generic well-architected, and we said, does it apply? If so, yes. And then how? And how do you suggest we apply that to an SAP environment running on AWS?
Awesome. So we're going to go into in a bit some of the actual like optimization style conversations that you would have. And I think if you are out there today and you run an SAP workload, then this is definitely a kind of conversation for you to tune into. But before we get into that, we obviously mentioned at the start, this is version 2. So what's the difference between version 1 and version 2?
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Great question. So version 1 was a big lift, and it's I think it's about 100 pages worth of advice and design principles and best practices. Version 2, we added the sustainability pillar because that came out between version 1 and version 2, and our focus on sustainability as an organization and for our customers has grown drastically over the past 2 years. The second change we added was a start to finish update with all of our services. A lot happens in a year. I think we made something like 250 changes to it, where we had released new services or had new compute types. The recommendation had changed. We release a lot of SAP specific services as well, like Launch Wizard to automatically deploy SAP systems on AWS. We've integrated SAP with Application Insights. It's called App Insights for NetWeaver. And so all of this innovation that AWS brings and regularly releases was sifted back through the lens and updated in version 2. And then the final sort of big change was, as well as it being a white paper on the website that you can download as a PDF and read through the whole thing if you want to, we also enabled self-service. So you can now download a JSON file and upload that into the console, into your AWS account in the well-architected tool in the console, and it will allow you to run the SAP lens as a Q&A, question and answer, the same way as you would run our normal well-architected framework for AWS. So what we see customers and partners doing now is they'll run the SAP lens and they'll upload this JSON, and then they'll use the console and the question and answer format within the tool for the basis of their review and for the meetings that we run around it.
Oh, okay. So that's more. So previously, would it have to be someone from an AWS side to come in and do that conversation with them?
Yes, correct. And it was a lot of manual writing and copying and pasting, and okay, now we're talking about this, and I'll paste that into Word and I'll take some notes against it,
right?
Or, those sorts of things. Now the well-architected tool allows you to it's got checkboxes for each of the best practices. If you don't check the checkbox, at the end, it'll spit out a report for you and say, hey, we noticed you didn't check this checkbox. The suggestions are the following. And please go to this URL to read some more detail on how you might remedy this, or how you might change this from a risk to being remedied.
Do you know, we haven't actually done an episode on the well-architected framework. I was just saying, we talk a lot about the well-architected labs because a lot of optics are heavily involved in development and management of those, and they're based on the structure. And I remember doing, when I was at KPMG, I do remember when we were a very small team when I first started, and I remember all of us sitting in a room and we had our TAM go through the well-architected review, and I was like a grad. I didn't know what the hell was going on, and I just remember being like loads of like greens and like reds and being like, we've done this, we haven't done this, and I didn't know what anything meant. But that's really cool that it's come on that far to be a bit more of it's not automated, but it's a way that like kind of condenses the process. I think is great.
Yeah, exactly, and it is very much an interactive form, and at the end you get the greens and reds and yellows, and where you haven't checked something, here's how you can remediate it, here's a URL to go and read about it.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, before we jump onto the kind of cost pillar of that tool, we've got a question. Is SAP Lens version 2 or version 1 mainly focused on business use, or could it be used for education or research processes?
I mean, the way I've actually said to people in the past, I wish I had it when I was implementing SAP on premises and like over the last 10 years. So whilst it has suggestions at the lowest level of detail, which are AWS specific, the design principles and the best practices are meant to be timeless. So things like right sizing your compute and using cost-effective resources and ensuring that you have financial operations so that you're aware of your expenditure. Those things are not necessarily AWS specific, not necessarily business specific, educational or research specific. They're just designed to be good things to do in an SAP landscape. I'm trying to answer the question. I'm not entirely sure.
No, that's good.
Educational purposes, but we certainly have people who read it.
We like it. Yeah. Well, that's maybe that's a bit of a good segue because, as I said at the start, SAP not something that I work a lot with my customers about. So before we jump into the actual lens part, is there anything that we should know about like the products that we on Amazon side help customers deploy or sell for SAP? Does it work on any kind of workload or certain type of workloads? Any kind of background we need to know?
Yeah. So Mostly what we're talking about in the SAP lens is SAP ERP systems, and they're natively installed. It's a bit more traditional monolithic architecture. There's binaries. We're usually installing it on EC2 instances, on EC2 systems. SAP has a very strict certification process, which says this is what you can install it on. This is how you can install it, and this is how you operate it, and even what you can plug into it. Several and many things that we would use to modernize a workload are a bit of non-starters. Like I mentioned before, like you can't run many SAP products on RDS simply because SAP don't certify them to be running on those sorts of services. You can't run it serverless because it is a very big monolithic architecture with a lot of business logic in it. But there are patterns that you can scaffold around it, and I think that's what we try to do. And that when I talk about our SAP specific services that AWS has released, they're really trying to make SAP as cloudy as possible. Things like being able to scale horizontally very easily and automatically. Things like being able to deploy and tear down environments in an automated fashion. So we're sort of taking the new paradigms and the new technology and trying to apply it to a somewhat old-fashioned architecture, but a very reliable and important architecture that runs 77% of the world's transactions, right? So
yeah,
we don't want to mess with it.
Yeah. So let's get into it. So, what are some ways in which we can optimize SAP? Just kind of maybe a couple. Obviously, we recommend doing the whole well-architected review. But yeah, if you were going to pick a couple ones that you see customers kind of make the most benefit from, what would you say?
Yeah, there's probably sort of four key themes. Just like the first one is the architecture pattern that a customer chooses. The second one is the compute type. I'm kind of going from largest to smallest. The third is the storage type that they use, like EBS and shared storage and things like that. And the fourth one is how they derive value from operations by adopting those SAP specific services that I talked about, and reducing that undifferentiated heavy lifting that we want to reduce for our customers a lot. So I could talk through those in a little bit of detail.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So the architecture pattern is generally all about what your business requirements are and how much redundancy you have. So SAP systems can be quite big. If you talk about SAP's most modern product, S/4HANA, the ERP system runs on an in-memory database called HANA. And we see customers having sometimes 2 terabytes, 4 terabytes, up to 24 terabytes and even 60 terabytes of databases in memory. And that has to run on our EC2 servers. So they run on these really big EC2 servers, like the high mem ones, the U24 terabyte, the U6 terabyte. So when you talk about redundancy on those, if you want 3 copies of your production system because you want a highly available one across availability zones, and then you want another one in another region for disaster recovery, then you're talking about having 3 really large and
really big ones,
costly servers, right? And so really understanding what your recovery time objective is, what faults you're protecting against, and how quickly you need to recover from those types of faults is really important. And we do see some customers that they might do that, and then we go back to them, we have a well architected review, we talk to their business, and the business says, oh no, it's okay if SAP is down for 4 hours. It runs our manufacturing site, but we plan our manufacturing on a 24-hour rolling basis, and we can fall back to paper-based forms for 4 hours if we have to. We'll receive and the site will keep going. It's getting less and less like that in our integrated digital society that we're in now. But these are the types of conversations that in a well-architected review, it start with what your business requirements are. Do you really need all of that? Are you creating a gold-plated solution? In which case, it's going to be more costly, or not. So, I think that's probably the key one is like, what's your architecture pattern? How much redundancy do you have? How big do you have to be? Can you get some of that data out of memory? Can you archive it? Can you put it in other systems? Because that all flows through your redundancy pattern.
Right.
So yeah, that's probably number one is, know your business requirements so that you know how much redundancy and what size you need.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the same kind of concept at all, but I remember talking to this is years ago, talking to someone about they had every single one of their accounts, and they had like I think it was like 5 or 7 accounts per application. They had exactly the same infrastructure in every single one, up 24/7, and it was like, what? Why? Are you gonna fail over to like any of these? Like, no, one of them's fail over, but we need them all up all the time just in case. And you're like. And they were, I think I budgeted out that they'd overspend by like their budget by like millions of dollars. And they were like, oh, no, it's be fine. And then 2 years later, I like move on from that. And I hear on the grapevine, oh yeah, they're in trouble. They overspent. So yeah, knowing your business is a great shout out.
Yeah, we need that up all of those all of the time is usually something to drill down on.
Yes, something to point into.
Yeah.
But you're going on to the next one. You mentioned storage and archiving off maybe your data. Is that something that you suggest people do to S3 or AWS, or where do people normally go to kind of archive that stuff?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. It's either sort of to another system, which might be more EBS based than in-memory based, or if it's archival, then it's usually S3. We see a lot of our customers running their backups straight into S3 infrequently accessed now.
Nice.
Because those backups are so infrequently accessed, and they get the cost optimization from that. So the storage optimizations that a lot of SAP customers see, a lot of them have been running on us for, some of them upwards of 7 years, and they're still running on GP2. And even just having a look at that and saying, can you move to GP3? Do you need all of that storage? Sometimes they've striped disks, or they've added storage because they need a specific performance characteristic like IOPS or throughput. And then moving to GP3, they can not only save on a per gigabyte price, which is about 15% cheaper or 20% cheaper, but then they can right size their performance characteristics as well. And maybe they only need improved throughput and they don't need IOPS or vice versa. And again, so that right sizing of storage, in the typical customer conversation that's still on GP2, we see that they can usually save about 15% moving from GP2 to GP3 and right sizing. So that sort of storage, and then of course you mentioned the archival and the backup of data. We didn't have S3 infrequently accessed 4 or 5 years ago. We didn't have Glacier Deep Archive. So again, another review, and you've got everything in S3. Okay, well, we've got lifecycle management now. You probably should start moving it down the tiers of S3.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. All right, so we've got about 7 minutes left. We do want to touch on it like a customer's kind of success story, but was there any other of the things you wanted to go into a little deeper about the cost optimization part before we move on?
I mean, I think you've probably called it out in other shows, but just the compute savings that can be had. As I said, we're pretty limited to the SAP certified compute, and we've got a web page on that says like these are the EC2 instances that are certified. But moving from C5 to C6, you get both a performance improvement and a cost per performance increase. And then even moving to our A series, so like C6A, the AMD based architectures that we have, parts of SAP environments can move straight to C6A or M6A or R6A, and they're generally 10% cheaper and a little bit more performant. So we've seen customers just switch overnight and see 10% come off their bill, and then they're even more performant, which you'd never get in the sort of old on-premises days, those sorts of things. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right. So yeah, if you're out there looking at your SAP workload and now you've got some tips, you can use a well-architected framework to do that. You know, kind of the cost areas you can look at. But yeah, let's hear of so any customer success stories that you can like shine a light on that people can kind of look to for not guidance, but to look up to.
Yeah, sure. So last year in Australia, we had Macquarie Bank go live with their SAP core banking system. So this SAP system, I think it supports 1.7 million customers in Australia.
Wow.
And they, very successful. I think, they had SAP solution architecture support all the way through. They did it all themselves. And then, they used the SAP lens, I think it was about 4 months before go live, to do a review. Found a few little things in terms of cost optimization, found a few things in terms of performance, managed to squeeze another 20% out of an overnight batch job, which, for a bank is pretty good. It sounds boring, but if they can give themselves another hour of payments being up to date, then they can do all sorts of other innovative things and better things for their customers.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we've published a case study with them that you can see. But I think the other thing that it really did was they used the review as part of their assurance process with the local regulator.
Okay.
So financial services institutions usually, quite strongly controlled, security, backups, resilience, etc., are super important themes for a bank. And in moving to AWS, they use the SAP lens as part of their, assurance to the regulator to show them that they'd gone through the right process, they'd done due diligence, and that they were using, design principles and best practices that AWS was supportive of. So, sort of a triple whammy of benefits there for Macquarie Bank. Performance, cost optimization, and security and assurance. So
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, I don't work in that area, so why would I? But having that kind of thing and say like we're following this and referring to it is great. I didn't even know you could do that. So yeah, if you need to do any assurance stuff, awesome. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. I wanted to touch really quickly on you mentioned the sustainability pillar that you've added information about. Obviously, cost and sustainability do go hand in hand. Is there anything from that pillar that you want to mention of interest in terms of like SAP in the lens?
Yeah, we don't have any sort of specific sustainability services for SAP, and many of the suggestions that we have are quite aligned with cost and cost and sustainability too. I think the only I guess branch that we saw in terms of where cost and sustainability were sort of went in different directions was things like turning off systems when you don't need them, even if you do have the 3-year savings plan or the 3-year reserved instance. That there's still weekends, out of hours, non-production systems that even in the SAP world, can be turned off. And we usually see customers, saying, "Oh, it's okay. I've reserved the instances anyway, or I've got the savings plans anyway, so I'm just going to leave them on." And that's kind of the difference between the major difference between cost and sustainability. Sustainability is, well, the more you have off, the less electricity you use. The more capacity is shared with other customers and in the data center. So there's another consideration, which is the sustainability aspect of it, not just the cost and the commercials. So
yeah, I think that's a great shout, especially because people, when we talk about things like savings plans in our eyes, we kind of don't talk about turning them off. Like I know that from our team's point of view, we often don't. But yeah, it's a good point. A lot of the time, you can still make a saving on it, or it can move to somewhere else, or it is more sustainable just to turn those things off when you're not using them. And if you're not going to use them anyway, you're not going to get any benefit from leaving them on. And especially if SAP is becoming more cloudy, as you said, which I love, then it can handle that kind of thing. And I think especially with those large applications, people do not panic, but worry about turning things off. I think we had some instances like that. And but yeah, now things are moving in that direction. We have the ability to turn things off, turn that light off when you're not in the room, kind of vibe.
that's it. It's like walking out of the room and leaving the light on just because you can, right? So
Yeah,
we should
so
all
annoying.
think about it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. That is it. We are done. Thank you so much. That was so informative. I'm definitely going to look more into maybe doing a full episode about the well-architected framework and get someone on to do that. Maybe come back. And we've had thank you for streaming. This person also, just to shout them out, just said, didn't know anything about SAP, but here to learn. So that's what we hope everyone is going to be like.
Fantastic.
Great. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much.